One woman tried to abolish this practice in Zimbabwe. It's widely practiced in Kenya. It can't be refunded in Uganda, but a modest amount of money and a kola nut is acceptable in Senegal. We're talking about the customary practice of the dowry and bride price, both highly regarded in many cultures across the continent, but also seen as vessels that reinforce negative stereotypes. So which one is it? Well, that's the topic of this episode, and we're glad you can join us. I'm Ayen, along with my colleagues Auriane and Hayde Adams Fitzpatrick, and we're joined by Aisha from the Hausa service and marvelous Nyahuye from the Zimbabwe service. Welcome, ladies.
Welcome to the show.
So, ladies, first things first, there's a lot of confusion between the terms, the dowry and the bride price. So, by definition, the dowry is a transfer from the bride's family to the groom's family. And the bride price is the opposite. It's a transfer from the groom's family to the bride's family. Now, obviously, this varies from country to country. In South Sudan, for example, we call it the dowry when the groom gives to the bride's family. But of course, in Nigeria, for example, there's a lot of differences.
To me, the bride price is a token, that highlights the degree of commitment by the man to the woman. And in Nigeria, it differs. It cuts across the religious and cultural,
barriers.
Barriers. Okay. In the upper north, we have both Christians and Muslims, but the Muslim north practice dowry, which is guided by Islamic injunctions. And it should be nothing less than a quarter of a dinar. While the Christian North practice something similar to what they practice down south and the east and the west. There you have the traditional marriages. The woman is sorted for by the groom-to-be. His family, presents some gifts that cuts across all cultures. Now, they have kola nuts, they have yams, symbolic items that represent their token, asking for the girl in marriage. I think, basically that tradition is a wonderful tradition, but because of the way we do, people practice it these days, it brings about other issues, challenging issues up north. We have issues of modernization, where you have, you have 7 days going from one kind of ceremony to the other, and this, weighs a lot of burden on the groom.
I see.
And then it brings about issues of men not getting married. You have ladies.
And we're absolutely going to get to all of those issues. But Marvelous, I want to hear from you. You're from Zimbabwe,
yes,
and I know it's multifaceted there too.
In Zimbabwe, I think we also have similar traditions to what is actually practiced in Nigeria. But in our customary marriage, it's called roora in Shona, which is one of the tribes there. And in Ndebele, it's called lobola. And I think it's the same in South Africa. But basically, it's the coming together of two families. It's a symbol of the love between the groom and the bride. So what happens is when the man decides that he wants to marry, he finds a negotiator called Nyahuye. And that negotiator will literally negotiate on his behalf on how much monetary compensation he's going to pay to the family, because he's given a list where he has to buy groceries that are eaten at the event and also some clothes and some cows. But really, it's just a symbol of the love and unity between the two families.
Absolutely. Well, this is a multi-layered conversation, and we want to hear from you at home. What does this practice look like in your country and your culture? Let us know on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle is @VOA Our Voices, or send us a message on WhatsApp. That number is on your screen. And Auriane, I want to bring you into this conversation because these are practices that you hold very near and dear to your heart.
That's right, Ayen. I grew up here in the U.S. I've been here for 20 years. But about 8 years ago, I went back to Burundi to get married in a 5-step ceremony that took several days.
5 steps?
5-step ceremony. But, in those ceremonies, one of them is called gukwa, where they give inhuano. That's the dowry. And I would actually trade my white wedding for that dowry ceremony, simply because of the meaning of it. The meaning of it is two families coming together, not two people, two families coming together to make a covenant, to help these two people who are in love to stay together and to be nurtured in so many different ways. And so when that celebration happened, I really, really was so proud of the culture, the Burundian culture, and that's why I really admire the fact that there is such custom. And I think that the covenant comes with gifting, and I appreciated the fact that there was gifting. Like in this picture, you will see my husband giving my mother a gift, and in this other picture, you will see myself giving my mother-in-law a gift. So we are exchanging gifts, we are showing humility, we are showing respect, we are showing love, and so that custom is very
foundations
important.
of a healthy marriage.
Exactly.
Well, you know, what's so interesting, of course, this isn't something that is part of my culture, but of course, living and being in South Africa and being South African, I'm very aware of, as Marvelous said earlier, of lobola culture, and that to me is somewhat still controversial amongst people. But as an outsider on this, what I love about lobola, the idea that, you know, it's a show of gratitude to the bride's family for raising an upstanding
exactly right.
Woman, for the investment that they have put. I think no matter what culture you're
It's
from, and we all
interesting.
are from some tribe or other.
It's interesting how similar they are.
Right, and that, you know, that you talked earlier, Aisha, about symbolism, and I think we can take many things away from this, but the symbolism, I think, is what it was intended to be. You know, there's an interesting debate going on around the dowry, where the woman is the person who pays the husband's family a dowry. In India, in Indian culture, there's an interesting debate going on about what the dowry was meant to be and what it has become. The dowry was actually, when I was looking at this, it actually seemed to me, I'd like to think of myself as very progressive and very liberal in my thinking. And I could see that, you know, it started out as actually something that had very progressive intentions, that it was meant for the woman to enter into a marriage with financial security and financial resources, you know, in case of an emergency, so that she's set up, you know.
But it's interesting because in India, it's the women who control the dowry.
That is how it used to be. There is a professor of history at Baruch College in New York. Her name is Vina Talwa Oldenburg, and she has written a book called Dowry Murder, The Imperial Origins of a Cultural Crime. What's so fascinating about this is she talks about dowry crime these days, where women are now victims of domestic violence because of a dowry dispute. You know, and what's so interesting about this, she says that the dowry was, like you mentioned, something that was managed by women for women, but that with British colonial rule, that really, the social and the economic upheaval that came with that, women were stripped of their economic resources, women were stripped of their rights to inherit, and that is where this now became this issue where greed today has seeped into the culture. Families are demanding more and more of the bride, and if the woman's dowry doesn't live up to the man's family's demands, they can keep making demands on her, and that makes women vulnerable. They become they can become vulnerable to domestic violence.
Cultures.
Yes, and that is just one example of the evolution of the dowry and the bride price, and we're going to have a lot more on this conversation coming up, but we do have to take a short break. We have a lot more coming up, including the devastating details of a bride price story that took a life-ending turn for one young woman. But first, we asked our Africa Division colleagues how these practices vary in their countries, and it turns out each culture has its own spin. Take a look.
I'm from Ethiopia. The dowry process is delosh, and it's usually given by the groom for the bride. Groom will send his friends, the neighbors, and some elderly people along with a luggage full of gifts. Back in the days, or in rural cities, they send the cattle, sheep, or goat, a certain number of cattle. But in the city, they send like luggage, and then they'll show off saying that we bought this clothes, we got this from some like expensive store, and we're bringing this for the bride to have it. And then they'll show off jewelries, a lot of jewelries that are made from gold and silver. And then all her neighbors, her dad, her uncles, her aunties, they'll sit around and they'll clap, and if they'll say we have accepted this, and they will take it to the room, and usually the groom and the bride are not allowed to be there. And then after that, at the end, everybody will feast. They will throw like a feast. There will be music, food. It's so beautiful.
I'm from Rwanda, and in my culture, bride price is ingwano, and the ceremony or the process of paying dowry or bride price is called gukosha. And it's a day of celebration. We usually gukwa, quote unquote. The bride price is in form of cows. We hold cows as a very important symbol in our culture. And so the families of the girl and the boy will negotiate on the amount of cows that this girl is worth, and that is always usually based on some factors, including her education, her background. But it's not really about the money or the number of cows. It's about these two families coming together to celebrate the union.
My tribe is called Zagawa tribe, and we live in this desert side of Darfur, North Darfur. The bride price, we call it Sidak or Tagi. In local language, they call it Tagi because they give it to the girl. So most of the tribe, they keep camels, and some of them they do cows, but mostly camels. So it depends of the what number they negotiate, like 150, they have to give it to them. So in my tribe, if you have girls, that means you're going to get rich because they will give you a lot of camels. So if you have boys, that you will be broke because you have to pay a lot to get them married. But the price is also had effect because as a girl, if you got married, you will never get divorced. We don't have divorce. You never get divorced because the divorce, they already paid your price, so you cannot divorce. Even the husband is passed away, you will marry the brother. If the brother passed away, you marry the other cousin. You just stay in that family forever.
Being part of Our Voices is about more than just sitting here and talking about women's issues. It's about listening to them
and bringing their opinions to the table and making sure their voices are heard.
Because our lived experiences, our stories, and our voices will help shape the next generation.
You're with Our Voices. Welcome back. Despite claims that the practice of bride price degrades women and a recent dowry case in Nigeria that tragically ended in a suicide, the tradition is upheld as a cherished culture and religious symbol of marriage. Many Nigerian scholars say that Western world has misunderstood the concept of dowry or bride price and that it actually honors women. Chika Odowa has this report.
Sadatu Ahmed Manga is having a dye called lalle, or henna, painted on her body because she's about to get married. It's part of the wedding custom in northern Nigeria, which is largely influenced by Islam. But the most important marriage custom is the bride price, a payment of cash that the fiancé gives to the bride's family to show how serious he is about the marriage.
In Islam, bride price has to be paid before the wedding. Bride price started since the days of the Prophet Muhammad. May peace be upon him, and we continue it.
But more Nigerians are condemning the bride price as a degrading practice that requires payment for marriage and places a monetary value on women. Women are largely left out of determining the bride price, which is negotiated between the male relatives of the bride and groom. In October, a 17-year-old northern Nigerian girl burned herself to death out of shame because her boyfriend could not afford the agreed-to bride price, which was less than $50.
Initially, this issue of dowry and bride price was more like a pleasantry being exchanged between the husband-to-be and the in-laws to be. And when it all started, from various cultures, it were little things that everyone can afford. But as time goes on, it became so big that most young people cannot be able to afford. So it's a thing of concern. So it's like business and using it to put people in classes.
But African literature scholar Dr. Agatha Ukata blames radical feminist ideology for the rising criticism of bride price. She also says the tradition is misunderstood by the Western world.
There is a cultural shock for the West for them to say that there's something called bride price, because this is quite different from what is obtainable within the Western culture.
Getting married in Nigeria is big business. In fact, the wedding industry here generates millions of dollars. But for many people across Nigeria, it's not the fashion or the glamour that symbolizes a wedding. It's the payment of the bride price. And if the bride price is not paid, then the couple is not married. Paying a bride price is the opposite of paying a dowry, which is wealth transferred from the bride's family to the groom or his family. The majority of Nigerians across all religions uphold the tradition of bride price and say, unlike a dowry, it underscores the value of a woman.
I think it's right. I think that's the only way you can show a lady to appreciate the love for her, like to show how much you love her.
And for families like Manga's, the marriage is not truly valid and celebrated until the bride price has been paid. Chika Odua, for VOA News, Yola, Nigeria.
Well, this is a tragic case and one in a million, I will say. And she acted on impulse. You know, that second when you just lose it all and you don't know what to do. And then she just did what she did. And then it ended up in that tragic situation. But there are other ways she could have gone about it. Because back in Kano State, when they started marrying off unmarried women, widows, and spinsters, the government organized weddings. And then that state where she comes from, Zamfara State, also said they were going to borrow into that and then adopt that same thing. If she had spoken to someone, probably she would have had someone to come and step into her. But come to think of it, why should I marry my daughter off to a man who cannot even pay 20,000? 20,000 naira is less than $50.
That's what they were asking for?
Yes. That's you know, the highest you could pay in a rural community like where she comes from, 20,000. But it doesn't just end at the dowry. There are other things involved, and I think modernization come into play here.
Yeah.
Because you have, like you said, 5 steps of wedding, ceremony. Sometimes you have 7 steps, different days, and you have to provide for the, you have to provide for her for the clothes she wears, for the food to eat and everything, and then the gifts to accompany her with it. And going to her own house, the lady also has to come into the marriage with something, like you said earlier in Hayde,
The dowry.
the dowry, and then something to give her some financial support when she, so that she can stand up. Yeah.
But in Zimbabwe, I would like to just come in and say, this is the situation now where you have the negotiator coming in to speak to the family of both the bride and the groom.
Right.
If they had spoken as families, maybe they could have resolved the issue.
So Marvelous, this makes me wonder, are these cultural practices hurting or helping the institution of marriage?
Helping and hurting at the same time.
Yeah, I think so
I would
too.
say that they're helping
in
in making the two families come together, and also when you have problems as two couples, you can go in there and go back to the family and get them to talk to you, and the negotiator comes in again and tries to negotiate for a settlement of how you can move the love forward. But it also hurts now when we get to the situation where the family asks for an exorbitant amount.
That's right.
They will be like, she's a doctor. We need to get all the money that we...
So the more accomplished the woman is, the more her dowry
That's
is.
what happened to a friend of mine who could not afford
yes.
to marry, to pay lobola for a woman who was so educated and who he saw as his intellectual equal. But she was a doctor, and the father kept reminding him that, I invested in my daughter, so you've got to come up, you've got to put up all this money, and that worries me. You start out your life with so much debt, just trying to afford the bride. But even he's saying he's considering marrying outside his culture, or outside his race. What does that then do at the end of the day for the culture and the tradition, and for making sure that
families are now looking at it as a source of income, which is very sad, because initially it's just supposed to be a symbol of unity, but it becomes a source of income.
But that is exactly the problem, is that you have a lot of poor families who see the husband as a potential income generator.
Yeah, exactly. Like in my culture, like you have the 5 ceremonies, and in those 5 ceremonies, they say we're going to get something out of it. And when they start to look at the money, and it's unfortunate because these ceremonies are well-meaning, but the negative part, as you said, the consequences, as you say, Ayen, is when they start to calculate everything. But in the past, we never used to hear the complaints about the price of the weddings because they used to just use the minimum that they had.
And I
because
think also they used to go back to the
role.
tradition to say, why exactly are we doing this? What's the symbol? So families have to sit down together and really discuss, why are we doing this? Whether your daughter is a doctor.
And these are
I think they
questions.
do, but modernization plays a very key role here.
It does. And
But
these are
it's not
things
just
that...
modernization. I think we talk about modernization, and this is true, yes. But also, at the same time that our economies are modernizing, our economies are also in decline. And so we talk about income generation. People are looking for this as a money-making scheme.
And young people in particular.
A history professor, I'm all getting all academic here on the subject, but Jabulani Mapalala from the University of Zululand, according to his estimation, about 60% of black couples in South Africa are preferring to live in sin because they simply cannot afford to get married. Which again brings the question, what does it do then for the culture if then children are seen as being born out of wedlock or even as illegitimate, regarded that way because the parents never got married. So that and the fact that I worry that young people are sitting with this concern that we cannot get married, how legitimate is our union going to be? And also starting out their life in debt. I think when money comes into it, at the same time though, if young people in an economy like South Africa's where there's so much inequality, people are either very poor and extremely wealthy.
And Hayde, we're also seeing a lot of very powerful and, like independent women also coming into with a new practice that we're seeing. They help the groom to pay the bride price, so to speak, and that's taboo.
And to speak about modernization.
Sure. Even in Burundi, if you help your husband to pay for your bride price, it's very shameful.
And I personally don't see anything wrong with that. And I'm speaking as a young person who is not married yet. But for me, these are issues that we really think about. How much is it going to cost me?
Would you want a dowry to be paid for you?
You know what? I'm of two minds of this because you talked about the evolution of marriage or the evolution of the dowry, and that's something that I think about a lot because I think that it has created a lot of negative consequences for women in particular. But at the same time, I do see the cultural aspect. I think for me, if I was to be the negotiator, I would ask my groom's family to build a school, something that would last long within. But I know you don't think that's a good idea.
That because I would still want, if I were to ever remarry again, I would like my family to receive some kind of gift from my husband. Yes, not to the community. The government can take care of the community.
So when people see the symbolism, right? People love the symbolism.
Why government?
You think that
why should government take care of that?
The community.
No, the community, like a boho, a school,
like a school,
but
or something.
For me, my family has to get something from my husband to be.
Thing.
That's the thing. It's a generational thing. I would still want to go
people,
back.
A
bit older.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that it definitely is generational because to be honest with you, people my age are the ones who have had to sit with the consequences that were created by the older generation.
And I think also,
Ayen, I agree with you 100% because in my culture, there are some ceremonies that you're not even supposed to speak nor be seen.
And
in some of
supposed to feed the.
But in some ceremonies, I showed up and I was present.
We need more awareness. We need to now talk to the younger generation to see this is the pros and cons of the culture,
and then so that they know that it's our heritage, and then we should hold on to our heritage. It's deeply rooted in our cultures,
and we can lose some of the ones that are not good.
But also,
we
ensuring
can,
that at the end of the
woman.
day, it doesn't set women up for a life of abuse and a life of disempowerment.
Not really.
When men think that they own the women.
Right, that women aren't, and I'm going back to the dowry issue, where a dowry dispute can at the end of the day take a woman from something that was meant for her to be empowered to a point where she becomes
an asset.
A victim,
but I think
essentially,
also
of domestic violence.
Social media has sold this custom as being buying the woman. That's what I think. And maybe we need to go back and explain that, no, this is our culture and we are for and against some of the practices, but for me, it should stay.
Well, there's a woman in Zimbabwe who disagrees with a lot of us here, actually, and we're going to introduce you to her after the break. She is a vocal woman who is challenging the legality of the bride price custom in Zimbabwe. Stay tuned.
is about more than just sitting here and talking about women's issues. It's about listening to them.
And bringing their opinions to the table and making sure their voices are heard.
Because our lived experiences, our stories, and our voices will help shape the next generation.
Welcome back. Each week we feature African women who are disrupting the norm and creating positive change around the world in a segment we call Women to Watch.
Our woman to watch comes from my home, Zimbabwe. Priscilla Vengesai filed papers to argue in the country's constitutional court that the bride price tradition amounts to discrimination based on gender and sex, while perpetuating inequality. Alternatively, she wants parents of both the bride and the groom to be thanked for raising their children well through lobola in the spirit of gender equality. A lawyer by training and former Chitungwiza Municipality Chamber Secretary, Vengesai was uniquely positioned to present her case. Vengesai was bold enough to take her fight to the highest court in Zimbabwe, and that is why she is our woman to watch.
Sounds like she was very bold, huh? Well, be sure to watch Our Voices on the VOA website where you can catch up with the latest episode. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media where we have live chats on Twitter. Our handle is @VOA Our Voices.
And we now leave you with a quote from South African documentary filmmaker Sihle Hlope, who used her voice to say, "We have the power to make decisions and we respect our culture. When we question our culture, it doesn't mean that we want to do away with it completely."
And that's all from us today. I'd like to thank Aisha Mwazu from the Hausa service and marvelous Nyahuye from the Zimbabwe service. Ladies, it was a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us on the show.
Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely. As always, thank you for watching. Good day.